I'm Minnie, 65 years old, and a retired elementary school teacher from Portland, Oregon. My peaceful life shattered with one phone call from my son David. "Mom, we've changed the locks. You don't live here anymore," he said coldly. After sacrificing everything for my children when their father died 20 years ago, I never imagined my own son would try to steal my home of 40 years. But Stephanie, his wife, had been working on him for years. If you're watching this from somewhere where family still means something, give this video a like and subscribe to hear how I turned the tables on my ungrateful son. Life wasn't always this complicated. For 30 beautiful years, I was married to Frank, my high school sweetheart. We built our life in that 2-story craftsman house on Maple Street. Frank was a carpenter by trade, and he poured his heart into our home, crafting much of the furniture himself. The dining table, where we shared family meals for decades. The rocking chair, where I nursed all 3 children. The grandfather clock in the hallway. Each piece told our family story. When Frank died suddenly of a heart attack 20 years ago at just 52, my world collapsed. I remember standing in our kitchen, clutching the phone, my legs giving out beneath me, as the hospital delivered the news. One moment, he was heading to work, kissing me goodbye, and the next, he was gone. I was 45, with 3 children to raise alone: David, 20, Amanda, 18, and Jessica, 15. The grief was overwhelming, but I had no time to fall apart. The children needed me. David was just starting college. Amanda was about to begin, and Jessica was still in high school. Frank had life insurance, but it wasn't enough to cover everything. I made the decision to use most of our retirement savings to ensure all 3 children could complete their education. I picked up extra tutoring jobs in the evenings and weekends. My hands would cramp from grading papers until midnight, but I was determined to give them the future Frank and I had planned together. David studied business and was the first to graduate. I remember sitting in the audience, clutching Frank's old watch in my palm, whispering, "We did it, honey. He did it." David was always the responsible one, the one who stepped up after Frank died, helping with house repairs and looking after his sisters. He had his father's hands, capable and strong. 7 years ago, David met Stephanie at a business conference. She was beautiful, ambitious, and worked in real estate. When he brought her home to meet me, something felt off, but I pushed that feeling aside. My son was happy, and that's what mattered. They married within a year. A lavish wedding that seemed excessive to me, but Stephanie had insisted. I noticed how David deferred to her on every decision, from the venue to the cake flavor. Frank would have whispered one of his favorite sayings to me: "Watch how a person treats the waiter, Min, not how they treat the host." Over the years, Stephanie's influence over David grew. Family Sunday dinners became monthly, then quarterly. When they did attend, David was quieter, letting Stephanie dominate conversations. She would subtly criticize our home, suggesting renovations or commenting on how vintage everything looked. I didn't miss how her eyes measured each room as if already planning changes. Amanda noticed it too. "Mom, David doesn't even call me back anymore unless Stephanie's out of town," she confided one evening. Jessica was more direct. "That woman is isolating him from us." I defended David, not wanting to create friction, but deep down, I worried. Last Thanksgiving, things came to a head. David and Stephanie arrived 3 hours late. The turkey was dry, the sides cold. When I gently asked why they hadn't called to let us know they'd be late, Stephanie answered for him. "We have our own life, Minnie. We can't always revolve around your schedule." The pain in David's eyes when I looked at him told me he was caught between worlds, but he said nothing. 6 months ago, my sister Martha fell and needed hip surgery. At 70, she had no one else to help during her recovery. I agreed to stay with her for a few months, and David suggested he and Stephanie could house sit to keep an eye on my place. It seemed perfect. Martha lived just 30 minutes away, so I could check on the house occasionally. I left detailed instructions about watering my garden, caring for Frank's orchid collection, and which days the gardener would come for the lawn. The arrangement worked well for the first month. Then my visits became awkward. Stephanie would act annoyed when I stopped by, saying they were in the middle of something. I noticed small changes. My family photos replaced with Stephanie's modern art. Frank's reading chair moved to the garage, new curtains hanging where mine had been. When I mentioned these changes, David assured me everything would go back to normal when I returned. Then came the call that changed everything. "Mom," David said, his voice strangely formal. "We've changed the locks on the house. Stephanie and I have decided that you don't live here anymore." I thought it was some terrible joke. "What are you talking about, David?" "Of course I live there. That's my home." "It's too big for you alone. You're getting older and the stairs are dangerous. We've been talking about this for months." "No, David, you haven't been talking about this with me at all. Look, we've already moved your things out. You can pick them up tomorrow. You can stay with Martha permanently or find a senior apartment." The shock rendered me speechless. When I found my voice again, all I could say was, "That's very brave of you, David. Your father would be so disappointed." Then I hung up my hand, shaking so badly I dropped the phone. The next morning, I drove to my house with my heart pounding in my chest. As I turned onto Maple Street, the familiar sight of my blue Craftsman home came into view. Except now, there was a new red door, where my green one had been for decades. And there, scattered on the front porch in the light rain, were cardboard boxes. My life packed away like unwanted donations. I parked and approached slowly, as if moving through a nightmare. The boxes weren't even properly sealed, and water was seeping through the corners of several. I lifted the flap of one to find photo albums, Frank holding newborn David family camping trips Christmas mornings, the pages already curling from moisture. As I stood there, the new red door opened, and Stephanie appeared wearing designer loungewear like she belonged there. "Oh, good, you're here to collect these," she said, gesturing to the boxes with a manicured hand. "We need the porch cleared by this afternoon. We're having the railings repainted." "Where are my things, Stephanie? My furniture? Frank's things?" My voice sounded distant to my own ears. She shrugged. "We donated what we couldn't use. That old stuff was so dated, Minnie. We're modernizing." The casual way she announced disposing of 40 years of memories hit me like a physical blow. "You had no right," I managed. "This is my house." Stephanie's smile tightened. "Actually, David told me you practically promised this house to them years ago. Since you're settling in with Martha anyway, it just made sense to make the transition now." "That's a lie. I never promised anyone my home." Just then, David's car pulled into the driveway. He approached cautiously, looking between us. "Mom, I told you we'd have your things ready," he said, avoiding my eyes. "David Alexander Thompson." I used his full name for the first time since he was 12 and broke a neighbor's window. "What have you done? Where is your father's furniture, his clock, his bookshelves?" "We had to make room for our things," Stephanie interjected. "Besides, David agreed it was time to let go of all that old stuff." I turned to my son, searching for any sign of the boy I raised. "Is that true? You threw away your father's handcrafted furniture? The pieces he made for our family?" David finally met my gaze, but his eyes were different, harder. "Mom, you're too old to manage this house alone. The property taxes keep rising and the maintenance is too much for you. We're doing you a favor." "A favor?" My voice broke. "By throwing me out of my own home, by disposing of your father's legacy." "Don't be so dramatic," Stephanie sighed. "It's just stuff, and this neighborhood is appreciating quickly. It's a smart financial decision." I realized then that this wasn't a sudden decision. They had planned this, waited for the perfect opportunity when I was away caring for Martha. "David," I pleaded one last time, "this isn't you. This house is my home. It's where your father and I raised you, where we built our life." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, but Stephanie placed her hand on his arm, and whatever doubt existed vanished. The decision's made, Mom. We'll help you find a nice senior community. I noticed Mrs. Henley, my neighbor of 30 years, watching from her porch with concern. Several other neighbors had stopped their weekend activities to observe the confrontation. The shame of it, standing on my own porch being told I no longer belonged, burned through me. You'll regret this, I said quietly. Not because of what I'll do, but because someday you'll realize what you've thrown away. And I don't mean the house. I turned to leave, and Barbara, my closest neighbor, approached. Minnie, come stay with me tonight. Don't drive like this. That night, in Barbara's guest room, I lay awake, replaying every moment, wondering where I'd gone wrong as a mother. How had my loving son turned into this stranger? The cardboard boxes sat in Barbara's garage, my life reduced to damp containers. At 3 a.m., unable to sleep, I went downstairs and began going through one of the boxes. Among old photo albums and keepsakes was a metal lockbox I kept in my closet. Inside were Frank's journals and our important documents. Frank had always been the organized one, keeping meticulous records of everything. As I flipped through the papers, a folder labeled House Trust caught my eye. I opened it with trembling hands and began to read. A slow smile spread across my face as I realized Frank had protected us in ways I never knew. My brilliant, thoughtful husband had anticipated problems I couldn't have imagined. By sunrise, I knew exactly what I needed to do. The next day, I called Amanda and Jessica, asking them to meet me at a cafe downtown. When they arrived, their faces showed the concern Barbara must have shared with them. Mom, is it true David changed the locks? Amanda asked, sliding into the booth beside me. I nodded, pushing the coffee cup between my hands. And they've gotten rid of Dad's furniture. Claimed I promised them the house. Jessica slammed her hand on the table, causing other patrons to turn. That witch has been working on him for years. I knew something like this would happen. We'll help you fight this, Mom, Amanda said, her lawyer's mind already working. They can't just take your house. I pulled Frank's folder from my bag. Your father may have already taken care of that. I showed them the trust documents I'd found. Dad put the house in a family trust. Jessica's eyes widened as she scanned the papers. Not just that, I explained. He specified that I have lifetime rights to live there, and after I'm gone, it passes equally to all three of you. David can't sell it or transfer it without all trustees agreeing. Amanda, always the pragmatic one, tempered our optimism. These are old documents, Mom. We need to make sure they're still valid and nothing's changed. She was right. I needed professional help. I called Thomas Reynolds, Frank's old friend, and a retired attorney who had helped with Frank's will years ago. Thomas met us at his home office that afternoon. His eyebrows shot up as I recounted what had happened. Frank always was the careful one, he said, examining the documents. These appear to be in order, but we should consult with a current practicing attorney to be certain. I have someone in mind. While Thomas made calls, Amanda shared something troubling. Mom, this isn't the first time David has tried to get the house. Remember 3 years ago when he suggested you simplify your finances and put the house in his name? I did remember. He had presented it as a way to avoid probate later, but something hadn't felt right, and I'd declined. And Stephanie's been dropping hints about the house for years, Jessica added. At Christmas 2 years ago, she was showing me where they'd put their furniture. When the time comes, I thought she was just being insensitive, not actually plotting. Jessica pulled out her phone and showed me Stephanie's social media posts from the past week, photos of my home, with captions like, "Finally making this old house our own," and "Renovation plans underway. Goodbye 1980s kitchen." Thomas returned with news. I've set up a meeting with Sarah Williams tomorrow morning. She specializes in elder law and property disputes. Bring every document you have. property tax receipts, utility bills, anything showing your continuous ownership and residence. As we left Thomas's office, I felt a strange mix of emotions. The heartbreak of betrayal alongside a growing determination. Frank had protected me from beyond the grave, and now I would protect what he'd built for us. I never thought I'd have to fight my own son for my home, I said as we walked to our cars. Amanda hugged me tightly. You're not fighting alone, Mom. And David, he's lost himself. Maybe this will be his wake-up call. I hoped she was right. The son I raised was still in there somewhere beneath Stephanie's influence. But right now, I needed to focus on reclaiming what was mine. The next morning began a whirlwind of activity. First, I went to my bank to ensure David couldn't access any of my accounts. The bank manager was appropriately horrified by my situation and helped me secure everything, even suggesting I check my credit report for unauthorized activity. At 10 a.m., I met with Sarah Williams, a sharp-eyed attorney in her 40s, whose office walls were lined with family photos alongside her credentials. Thomas had briefed her, and she'd already reviewed the trust documents. Mrs. Thompson, based on what I'm seeing, your position is strong, she said. The house is held in an irrevocable trust with you as the primary beneficiary during your lifetime. Your son has no legal right to take possession, change locks, or dispose of property. So, what do we do? I asked. Call the police? Sarah tapped her pen thoughtfully. We could, but I suggest a more strategic approach. First, let's document everything. We'll send a formal legal notice establishing that they are currently trespassing in your home and have unlawfully disposed of your property. Will that get them out? It establishes our legal position. Meanwhile, we'll gather evidence of their actions. The social media posts, your daughter found statements from neighbors who witnessed your confrontation, documentation of the property they've disposed of. I'm worried about what else they might get rid of, I said, thinking of the few remaining pieces of Frank's that might still be in the house. That's why timing matters, Sarah explained. We'll prepare everything properly, then move decisively. If we act too quickly before documenting everything, they might claim you abandoned the property or gifted it to them. As Sarah outlined our strategy, I learned David had already attempted to transfer the utilities into his name. Fortunately, the trust documents prevented this without proper authorization. Sarah prepared a comprehensive legal notice while I made a detailed inventory of items missing or damaged, including approximate values of Frank's handcrafted furniture. The emotional value was incalculable, but for legal purposes, we needed dollar amounts. One last thing, Sarah said as our meeting concluded. I know this is your son, and that makes this incredibly difficult. Are you prepared to follow through even if it means potential legal proceedings against David? The question hit me hard. Despite everything, David was still my child. I remembered Frank's words from years ago after a difficult parent-teacher conference where we'd had to hold David accountable for bullying another student. Never let anyone walk over you, Minnie, not even our children. True love means setting boundaries, not enabling bad behavior. Yes, I said firmly. I'm prepared to follow through. Not just for me, but for David, too. He needs to understand there are consequences. Sarah nodded with approval. The certified letter will go out today. It outlines their legal violations, demands they vacate the premises within 10 days, and details the potential consequences if they refuse, including criminal charges for theft and conversion of property. As I left her office, I felt both drained and strengthened. The coming days would be difficult, but for the first time since that terrible phone call, I had hope. Frank had always said I was stronger than I knew. It was time to prove him right. 2 days after the certified letter was delivered, my phone rang. David's name flashed on the screen. I took a deep breath and answered. Mom? His voice sounded panicked. What is this letter? It says we're trespassing and could face criminal charges. It's exactly what it appears to be, I replied, keeping my voice calm despite my racing heart. There must be some misunderstanding. We thought you were okay with this arrangement. What arrangement, David? The one where you change my locks, throw my belongings in the rain, and dispose of your father's handmade furniture without my permission. That arrangement. Mom, please, can't we talk about this? Stephanie and I just thought. I'm not interested in what Stephanie thought. I cut him off. The house is legally mine, held in a trust your father established. You have no right to be there without my permission, which I am now formally revoking. There was a long pause. A trust? What trust? The one detailed in the letter your lawyer now has. I suggest you read it carefully. After I hung up, Stephanie called next. Her tone was different, angry rather than conciliatory. Listen here, Minnie, she spat. We've put money into that house already. New appliances, paint fixtures. You can't just demand it back. We'll fight this all the way. Every improvement you made to my property without permission is legally mine now, I informed her, repeating what Sarah had explained. But feel free to take the new refrigerator when you leave. I prefer my old one anyway. She hung up on me. The following day, Sarah arranged a formal meeting at her office. David arrived with a lawyer who looked fresh out of law school, while Stephanie sat beside him, arms crossed defensively. Sarah methodically walked through the legal documents. The trust Frank had established proof of my continuous ownership tax records showing I'd paid property taxes for 20 years, and statements from neighbors confirming my residence. As you can see, Sarah concluded, Mrs. Thompson has lifetime rights to the property. The trust is irrevocable, meaning it cannot be changed without the agreement of all beneficiaries, Mrs. Thompson and all 3 of her children. David's lawyer whispered something to him, his expression grim. Stephanie's face had turned an alarming shade of red. Furthermore, Sarah continued, we have documented evidence of the illegal disposal of Mrs. Thompson's personal property, which constitutes theft under Oregon law. We're prepared to file criminal charges if necessary. This is ridiculous, Stephanie burst out. That house is wasted on her. She doesn't need all that space. We're starting a family and need the room. Besides, we've already begun renovations. David looked at her in surprise. Starting a family? You told me you wanted to wait another 2 years. Stephanie faltered, then recovered. Well, plans change. The point is, we deserve that house more than she does. In that unguarded moment, Stephanie revealed her true nature not just to me, but to David. I watched my son's face as he looked at his wife like he was truly seeing her for the first time. Sarah was unfazed. Your opinion on who deserves the property is irrelevant to its legal ownership. Mrs. Thompson is offering you a grace period of 48 to vacate the premises and return all remaining personal items. After that, we will involve law enforcement. David's lawyer advised them quietly to accept the offer. The meeting ended with David signing an agreement to vacate within 2 days and Stephanie storming out ahead of him. As they left, David paused at the door and looked back at me. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I saw a flicker of the sun I'd raised, confused, ashamed, and finally beginning to understand what he'd done. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it and followed his wife. I sat in Sarah's office after they'd gone, emotionally exhausted, but relieved. Do you think they'll comply? I asked. Your son will, Sarah said confidently. He understands the legal reality now. His wife may be another story, but without his support, she has no standing. I nodded, feeling no joy in the victory. I've won back my house, but I may have lost my son. Sarah's expression softened. Give him time. Some lessons are painful to learn, but that doesn't make them less valuable. On the drive home to Martha's, I thought about Sarah's words and hoped she was right. The house was important, filled with memories of Frank and our life together. But David was irreplaceable. I had to believe that somewhere inside him, the son who once helped his father build bookshelves and brought me tea when I was grading papers late at night still existed. The next morning, I was helping Martha with her physical therapy exercises when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find David standing alone on the porch, shoulders slumped, eyes red-rimmed. Can I come in, Mom? he asked, his voice small, like when he was a child confessing to breaking a window. I stepped aside to let him enter. We sat in Martha's living room, an awkward silence stretching between us, until he finally spoke. "I'm sorry," he said, the words catching in his throat. "I don't even know how to begin to make this right." "Why, David?" I asked simply. "Why would you do this to me?" He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so like his father it made my heart ache. "It started small. Stephanie kept talking about how the house was too big for you, how you'd be safer in a senior community. She said we could help you by taking it over, that it made financial sense." "And you believed that was your decision to make?" "No. Yes. I don't know." He looked up, tears in his eyes. "She can be very convincing. She kept saying you'd thank us later, that all her clients who downsized were happier. Then it became about our future investment potential, the neighborhood appreciating." "So you decided to steal my home." David flinched at the word steal. "I told myself we were helping you, that you'd understand eventually. But when I saw that trust document, when I realized Dad had anticipated something like this..." His voice broke. "What kind of son am I that my father felt he needed to protect Mom from me?" The raw pain in his voice reached me. "Your father wasn't protecting me from you specifically, David. He was just being thorough, making sure I'd always be secure." "But he was right, wasn't he?" "Look what I did." David wiped his eyes. "Stephanie's been controlling. We're in debt from her spending, and she kept saying the house was the answer to our problems. I was too weak to stand up to her." "Where is she now?" "At a hotel. We had a huge fight after the meeting. She wanted to ignore the legal notice, said we could drag it out in court." He sighed heavily. "I told her it was over, that we had to leave. She said if I didn't back her up on this, our marriage was over. I told her maybe that would be for the best." The admission hung in the air between us. "I'm moving my things out today," he continued. "I've rented an apartment downtown. I found out Stephanie already sold some of Dad's furniture. The dining table, his bookshelves." The loss hit me anew. Those pieces weren't just furniture. They were tangible pieces of Frank crafted by his hands. "Your father spent months on that table." "I know. I helped him sand it." David's face crumpled. "I'll try to track them down, buy them back if I can. And Mom, I swear whatever it takes, I'll make this right somehow." I studied my son, this mixture of the boy I raised and the flawed man he'd become. The anger was still there, but alongside it now was something else, compassion for someone who had lost his way. "It won't be quick or easy, David. Trust once broken takes time to rebuild." "I know, but I want to try if you'll let me." By evening, Amanda, Jessica, and I stood on the porch of my home. David had texted to confirm they were gone and the keys were under the mat. As I turned the key in the lock, a new lock I would change again tomorrow, I braced myself for what we might find inside. The house was in disarray. Half-finished renovation projects abandoned some walls stripped of family photos, spaces where Frank's furniture had once stood now empty. But it was still my home, and I was taking it back. "We'll help you set everything right again, Mom," Amanda said, squeezing my hand. "It'll be better than before," Jessica added. As we walked through the rooms, reclaiming each space, my neighbors began to appear at the door. Barbara brought a casserole. Mr. Peterson from across the street carried in a potted plant. Mrs. Henley arrived with fresh linens. One by one, they welcomed me home, each small gesture helping to wash away the betrayal. That night, I slept in my own bed for the first time in months. Before turning out the light, I picked up the framed photo of Frank on my nightstand. "You were always the smart one," I whispered to his smiling face. Thank you for looking out for us even now." A week later, David called to tell me he'd filed for divorce from Stephanie. The news brought mixed emotions, sadness for his pain, yet relief that he was freeing himself from her influence. He asked if he could come by to help with repairs to the house. It was a small step, but an important one. 6 months passed like a season of healing. Spring arrived, bringing new growth to my garden and gradual renewal to my relationship with David. The house had been fully restored, not exactly as it was before, but in ways that honored both the past and present. Some of Frank's pieces were gone forever, but David had managed to track down and repurchase the rocking chair and grandfather clock. For Christmas, he gave me a hand-crafted side table he'd made himself, having taken woodworking classes to connect with his father's legacy. "It's not as good as Dad's work," he'd said shyly. "It's perfect," I'd told him, running my hand over the smooth surface. He would be proud. David visited weekly now, often joining his sisters for Sunday dinner, a tradition we'd reinstated. Without Stephanie's influence, he gradually returned to the son I remembered, though more subdued, carrying the wisdom that comes from difficult lessons. Today, they were all gathered in my home to celebrate my 66th birthday. The dining room buzzed with conversation and laughter. David had brought a new girlfriend, Lisa, a kindergarten teacher, with a quiet warmth that complemented his more serious nature. Amanda's husband was deep in conversation with Jessica about her new business venture. Martha sat in Frank's restored rocking chair, watching the family with contented eyes. The past months had changed me too. Working with Sarah, I had updated the trust with even clearer provisions for all 3 children, ensuring there could be no future misunderstandings. I'd also created a detailed inventory of everything in the house with instructions for each item after I'm gone, which won't be for many years yet if I have any say in the matter. Frank's journals had been a source of strength throughout the ordeal. I'd found entries from when the children were young, his hopes for them, his observations about their developing personalities. One passage in particular had sustained me during the darkest moments. David helped me in the workshop today. He's so eager to please, sometimes too eager. I worry he might be too easily influenced by stronger personalities. Need to help him find his own voice, his own strength. Minnie says I worry too much, but that's a father's job, isn't it? To look ahead and prepare our children for challenges they don't yet see coming. Frank had seen what I missed, but in the end, David found his own strength. It took a painful lesson, but some truths can only be learned through experience. After dinner, as everyone gathered in the living room for cake, I looked around at my family and felt profound gratitude. The house around us wasn't just walls and a roof. It was a vessel for our history, for Frank's legacy, for the lessons we'd all learned. "Before we cut the cake," I said, raising my glass, "I want to thank you all for being here, for helping restore not just this home, but our family." "To Mom," David said, raising his glass, "who taught me that love means both forgiveness and accountability." "And to Dad," Amanda added, "who's still looking out for all of us." As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, David lingered behind. We stood on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "I'm still sorry, Mom," he said quietly. "Not just about the house, but for losing sight of what matters." "I know, sweetheart, but you found your way back, and that's what counts." I squeezed his hand. "Your father once told me that the measure of a person isn't in never making mistakes, but in how they make things right afterward." David nodded, his eyes on the horizon. "I'm trying." "You're doing just fine," I assured him. After he left, I sat alone on the porch swing Frank had hung decades ago, reflecting on everything that had happened. The betrayal had been painful beyond words, but it had also revealed the strength of the foundation Frank and I had built, in our home, in our children, in the community around us. I've learned that love doesn't mean allowing yourself to be taken advantage of, even by those closest to you. That standing up for yourself can be an act of love too, for yourself and for the person who needs the boundary. The house stands strong around me, just as I've learned to stand strong within myself. Both have weathered storms and emerged more secure for the experience. Have you ever had to stand up to someone you love? It's one of life's hardest challenges, but sometimes the most necessary. I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more from me. Your support means everything as I continue sharing these life lessons. Thank you for listening, and remember, protecting yourself and loving others aren't mutually exclusive. Sometimes they're exactly the same thing.